Hello again. Welcome back to our second week video chatting together, except we're not chatting. It's just me chatting and you listening. But I hope all of you are well, your families are well, and you're coping with being at home a lot. It's a good time to get some extra reading done and hopefully just enjoying some time with your family that we don't get when we're so busy together. When we're so busy with other people, we don't spend time together. A few housekeeping points. First of all, I'm taping this on Thursday of last week. You should be watching this early Monday or Tuesday. So last Thursday, I had received many of your research papers and read them. You guys, all the ones I've received so far, you did an excellent job. You should have already received, if you sent me a research paper, you should have received an individual email from me with some feedback on your papers. I really, really enjoyed them. One thing, I would really like to see your final imitation also. I got a couple of those back, but I think it's been a few weeks ago, and so we just forgot about them. That was the one that was the beginning of the Jungle Book. So I'd love to read those if you want to send those along to me. You should also, after you've watched the video, as soon as you get it done, please send me your response to your friend Matt about how not to be shallow based on the Divine Comedy. Send those along to me and I will get back to you on those. I also should have already sent you, you should have received in your email the questions for next week. The questions that you did this week for the shorter Summa, you certainly may scan those in and send them to me if you want to. You are not required to. I do ask you to pause the video and go get them and have the questions there in front of you with a pen so that you can fill in things that you didn't understand, use that as a note-taking tool, and then, like I said, you can just show your parents that you did it, or you can send it to me if you'd like me to read it as well, and I'll be glad to do that. I think that's it. Oh, I'm also sending you this week, since we're not really doing artwork together, the junior high kids are learning about medieval books, which Tina, you did a great research paper on medieval manuscripts and illuminated manuscripts. So I thought you might enjoy seeing a few pages from medieval illuminated manuscripts. These are books of hours. They are the Divine Office shortened, a shortened breviary for lay people to use at home. These were mostly commissioned by wealthy people because books were very, very expensive. Having a custom book made and illustrated for you was an expensive venture. So the examples that I've sent to you, there's one it says Catherine of Cleves, I believe. And there's another one that are 2 pages from it's called the Très Riche Heures, the Rich Hours, of the Duc de Berry, another nobleman. This is his personal book of hours. It's really well known because it has so many illustrations. I believe 206 pages, not quite sure, but slightly over 200 pages. Beautiful illustrations, and a lot of them showing activities, normal activities of a medieval day or medieval year going through the seasons. And it's a great source for illustrations of what did it look like when farmers were out in their fields planting, and what did their clothing look like? What did the tools look like? So take a look at those. That's all. They're not really connected with our lessons, except these are both from the 1400s. And they're just beautiful. And so take some time to look at those. Either look at them on your computer, print them out. You can snoop around on the internet and do more research on those if you want, and just to enjoy those. Those were 150 years after St. Thomas, but still within the range that we're studying. This week is our first week of a 2-week study looking at Aquinas's Summa Theologica. Just to recap from what I said last week, for many years in the West, knowledge of the Greek philosophers and many of the Greek church fathers was lost. First of all, because the people in the West forgot how to read Greek. And second of all, there just wasn't a lot of coming and going between the West and East. especially after the Muslim takeover in the East and North Africa and Spain. But the Muslim takeover, which prevented interaction in some cases, actually brought about the renewal of knowledge of these works because they translated many Greek philosophers into Arabic and then passed that along to Western scholars who could speak Latin and Arabic. They translated into Latin. And so in a roundabout way, eventually Plato and Aristotle found their way into the West. And this was slightly before the time of Thomas Aquinas. When the knowledge of these things was renewed in the West, it was quite a startling moment for Western theologians because they really felt that Aristotle, what he said was true, that he was very reasonable, but in some cases he disagreed with Scripture and he disagreed with the church. And this might seem to us a simple thing. Well, obviously the church and Scripture are right. But if you think about it, if you really believe that two things are true, but they seem to disagree with each other, there's a strong motivation to find out why they disagree. What's the discrepancy between them if you believe they're both true? If you have two witnesses to an event and one says he was wearing a red raincoat, the robber was wearing a red raincoat, and someone else says he was wearing a blue raincoat, and you might say, okay, somebody's lying. These can't both be true. But then what if you arrest him and you find out it's half red and half blue? And so often there are ways that both things are true. And so the schoolmen, the scholastics, were a group of theologians that were very, very interested in figuring out how to deal with those apparent discrepancies and how to put all knowledge into one comprehensive whole. One early schoolman who worked on this was Peter Abelard. He lived in the 1100s, and he had a series had a book with a series of propositions that was called Sic et Non, yes and no. And he would put examples from the church fathers or from Scripture, quotes that seemed to disagree with each other, that seemed to be contradictory. And then he would work through the reasons for the seeming contradiction and the reason that it's not really contradictory, that they're really a harmonious whole. So Aquinas and his peers were the heirs of that tradition of looking at multiple threads of tradition, all of which are believed to be true, and figuring out how we coordinate those and make them agree with each other without doing damage to either source. So this week, as you can see, we're not going to read a lot of the shorter Summa. There's only really so much you can read at one time and understand it. At least it is for me. It's very heavy, intellectually heavy. Theologically and intellectually heavy. It's more of a bedside book. It's like a devotional book that one could pick up and read a section of each day or each evening and ponder the truth there. And I encourage you to do that with the remainder of the book. It's and then work your way up. I know, Marta, you talked about being familiar with the Summa of the Summa. This is the shorter Summa. And then Peter Kreeft also did an edited shorter Summa with his own commentary in the notes. And then, of course, the Summa Theologica in itself is thousands of pages long, and I aspire to work my way through it someday. But right now, the shorter Summa is as big a bites as I can take. But you can use this book as a devotional. Some people find theology very inspiring, and I'm one of those people. If truth and true propositions just thrill your spirit, if they appeal to you in that way, this is a wonderful use for the Summa, to use it as a daily devotional and just ponder a truth. Maybe you need to read the same truth several days in a row before it sinks in, maybe more than several days in a row. So we're just reading 2 sections. This week, the section I had you read was about the existence of God. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through the 3 articles that I had you read about and pick them apart. But the first thing I'd like to do if you will grab your copy of the Shorter Summa, let me grab mine. Let's open up to the very beginning. This is on page 45. Sorry, 45. The beginning of the section on proofs for the existence of God. I'm going to read on page 45, and I want to make a couple of observations about it. Because the chief aim of sacred doctrine is to teach the knowledge of God, not only as he is in himself, but also as he is the beginning of things and their last end, and especially of rational creatures, as is clear from what has been already said. Therefore, in our endeavor to expound this science, we shall treat 1. Of God, 2. Of the rational creatures advanced toward God, 3. Of Christ, who as man is our way to God. So now he's broken it down. He's given you a threefold structure of what he's going to do. Now he's going to dig into each of those. He's going to dig into the first of those. In treating of God, which was number 1, there will be a threefold division. For we shall consider 1, whatever concerns the divine essence, 2, whatever concerns the distinction of persons, 3, whatever concerns the procession of creatures from him. So these were all under number 1 in the first list. These 3 go under number 1. Oh, but now he's going to break it down even more. Concerning the divine essence, which was number 1 of the subheading number 1, we must consider 1, whether God exists, 2, the manner of his existence, or rather what is not the manner of his existence, 3, whatever concerns his operations, namely his knowledge, will, and power. Concerning the first, there are 3 points of inquiry. 1, whether the proposition God exists is self-evident. 2, whether it is demonstrable. 3, whether God exists. All right. I wanted to point this out to you because this is incredibly organized. Really organized. Aquinas had such an organized mind. The scholastics were very organized men. And if nothing else, reading this is an exercise in organizing your thoughts. It's amazing. But you always know where you are when you're reading the Summa, exactly what subheading you're talking about. And you can go back and if you ask yourself, now why are we talking about this? What was the point of this discussion? You can go back and find out. One other thing I wanted to mention, skipping back just a moment, in the prologue, this is on page 37. Aquinas says, because the master of Catholic truth ought not only to teach the proficient, but also to instruct beginners. According to the apostle, as unto little ones in Christ I gave you milk to drink, not meat, from 1 Corinthians. We purpose in this book to treat of whatever belongs to the Christian religion in such a way as may tend to the instruction of beginners. He says this is a book for beginners. Wow, I must be beginning to be a beginner because this is very deep. This is very difficult, but he says this is just the beginning. God is so incredibly deep. The riches of his wisdom, the riches of knowledge about him will never, ever be exhausted by us, even in eternity, because we will always be finite creatures. There will always be something else to learn about him. So it's amazing that he intended this little book for beginners. And Peter Kreeft makes a comment on that in the footnotes. Okay, so let's look at the first article. The first article I had you read about on page 46 is whether the existence of God is self-evident. I've got my sheet. I did a worksheet too, so I may need to refer to that. Now, I know that it's not written this way. When Aquinas says each article, he lists first the objections to it, then he answers on the contrary, and usually appeals to some authority. Then he says, I answer that, and he fully unpacks his answer and tells you what the reason is that he agrees with that authority. And then in order, he replies to each of the objections. Again, it's very organized. It's very neat and tidy, and you know where you are when you're reading these. But I asked you to write about it, to take notes on it in another order, because it's easier to follow in that order. So that's the order in which I'm going to go through it, the order of your worksheet. And the very first thing under that is, what is Aquinas' answer? What is his on the contrary? And remember, we're talking about whether the existence of God is self-evident. In other words, do we need to have it explained to us? Or can everybody just see it's true without any sort of proof at all? You know, a circle is not a square. If you know what a circle is and you know what a square is, that's self-evident. I don't need to prove that to you. It's just obvious. His answer is, no one can mentally admit the opposite of what is self-evident. As the philosopher, that's Aristotle, states concerning the principles of demonstration. But the opposite of the proposition God is can be mentally admitted. Scripture says the fool has said in his heart there is no God. So God is not self-evident. That God exists is not self-evident. So let's follow his line of reasoning. He's saying you can't really entertain as true something that is self-evident. We don't sit around and say maybe circles are squares. I will consider that, the possibility of that. We just don't do that. We don't do that. But there are people who mentally entertain the proposition that God doesn't exist. Scripture refers to those people. The fool has said in his heart there is no God. So he said, okay, if you can't really seriously entertain a proposition that is self-evident, and people really do seriously entertain the proposition that God doesn't exist, then it must not be self-evident. Okay. Then he goes on to his I answer that. And I asked you to write down the two ways that he talks about that something can be self-evident. He says, a thing can be self-evident in either of two ways. On the one hand, self-evident in itself, though not to us. On the other hand, self-evident in itself and to us. What's the difference? Okay, the difference goes along with exactly what I just told you about the circle and the square. You know what a circle is, and you know what a square is. And so if I say a circle is not a square, that is self-evident in itself, and it is self-evident to you, because you know what a circle and a square are. If I say a gobbledygook is not a thingamabob, that may be true. It may even be self-evident, but it's not self-evident to you, because you don't know what I don't even know what I said, thingamajig, and I don't even remember what I said. We don't know what those things mean. So he uses that example from Boethius. He says, Boethius says, some mental concepts are self-evident only to the learned, as that incorporeal substances are not in space. And he says, well, you have to know what an incorporeal substance is and what I mean by in space before you know whether or not that's true. It's self-evident, actually, because incorporeal means it doesn't have a body, and in space means takes up room. So what it means is things without a body don't take up any room. But you don't know that unless you know what those terms mean. So things can be self-evident in two ways. They can be self-evident in themselves and to everyone around, or they can be self-evident only in themselves. All right? He says, now because we do not know the essence of God, the proposition is not self-evident to us, but needs to be demonstrated by things that are more known to us. All right? When we say God exists, it actually is self-evident because God is existence itself. God is the one who exists. He is the I am. He exists. But we don't fully know God's essence, and so what his existence actually means, we don't fully know the depths of it. So we can't just say it's obvious, it's self-evident that God exists, because we don't fully know the terms. It's self-evident, but not to us. It falls into his second category. Okay, now let's go back. He had three objections. Let's go back to each objection, then let's read his reply. At the beginning of this, his first objection says it seems that the existence of God is self-evident because it's naturally implanted in us. All right? He appeals to another authority. It's saying the knowledge of God is naturally implanted in all. So we all naturally know there's a God. All right, this seems pretty good. This seems pretty good. What does Aquinas have to say? Let's look at his reply to objection 1. He says, okay, so we know God exists in a general and confused way. That's implanted in us by nature. We know there is a God. Everybody, if you think about it, Peter Kreeft mentions this too, every people group in the history of the world has had gods. They just know there is a God. Now, they don't know that it's the God of Scripture. They don't know it's the true God. But they just know there's a God. Atheism is an aberration in that sense, and it's relatively new. But we in a confused way, all right? But that is not to know absolutely that God exists. Just to know that someone is approaching is not the same to know that Peter is approaching. All right? You might know vaguely there is some sort of power out there, but that's not the same as knowing God, the God that Aquinas is talking about. So that's objection 1. Objection 2. Okay. He appeals to Aristotle again, the philosopher. All right. But he says, this proof, actually I'm just going to paraphrase this. This is from St. Anselm. Peter Kreeft says below, it's his famous ontological argument. Here it is in a nutshell. St. Anselm said that everyone can imagine a being who is all-knowing and all-powerful and all-good and all the attributes that we attribute to God. So we can imagine this. We can imagine a thing that is so great there is nothing greater. But the greatest thing of all is to exist. Anselm says that existing is better than not existing at all. So if you can imagine a being that's so great that nothing greater exists, it must exist because it would be greater if it did exist. Now, you kind of feel like somebody slipped something by you there. It seems like a sneaky sort of argument, and it sort of is. Aquinas doesn't actually agree with St. Anselm, although it's a very, very famous argument that if you can imagine something that there's nothing greater than, it must exist because existing is better than not existing. Let's see how Aquinas addresses the problems with this. Let's look in reply 2. All right. To cut to the chase here, Aquinas basically says that down towards the bottom of his answer there, towards the bottom of page 49, he says, it does not therefore follow that he understands that what the word signifies exists actually, but only it exists mentally. Nor can it be argued that it actually exists unless it be admitted that there actually exists something than which nothing greater can be thought. And this is precisely not admitted by those who hold that God does not exist. Right? All Anselm's argument really does is prove that we can think something greater than anything else that can be thought. It doesn't necessarily imply that that thing actually has to exist in reality. All right. I told you this was heavy stuff. All right. Objection 3. This one's the argument from truth. I love this one personally. Okay, so objection 3 is truth is self-evident, because if you say truth does not exist, and you say that's true, then truth does exist because you just said something that was true. So you can't ever say truth does not exist and claim that's a true statement. And God is truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Therefore, since truth is self-evident, God's existence is self-evident. Sounds pretty good. What does Aquinas do with it? Reply number 3. The existence of truth in general is self-evident, but the existence of a primal truth is not self-evident to us. The existence of truth in general, but not of a being that is not even the personification of truth. He just is truth in a way that our brains don't understand. All right, so in the first article, what has Aquinas accomplished? He has accomplished showing that the existence of God is not so obvious. It's not so plain to everyone that there's no need to demonstrate it. It's going to need demonstration. So that's convenient, because his second article was whether it can be demonstrated that God exists. So if it's not self-evident, can we demonstrate it? Because if it's not self-evident and it can't be demonstrated, that's going to be a problem. So let's cut right to the chase and go to his on the contrary. The apostle, that's Paul, says, the invisible things of him are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. We understand God because he made stuff. Look at creation. But this would not be unless the existence of God could be demonstrated through the things that are made. If I look at the trees, and that leads me back to God, then trees are demonstrating God's existence to me. Something has to be in existence before anything about it can be demonstrated. If the tree tells me that God is a glorious artist, well, you have to exist to be a glorious artist. So before there can be an artist, there has to be an existence of the artist. So that's his point there. He elaborates on that, and on your worksheet, I asked you for the 2 kinds of demonstrations. All right? So the first one, put my stuff down. The first one is called an a priori demonstration. Prior means before, right? So an a priori demonstration is when you look at the cause of something and you reason out to its effects. So if I say, it rained last night, and from that I reason out that it's going to be wet outside. All right, I reason from the cause, rain, and then I demonstrated the reasonableness of the effect, that there will be water on the ground. An a posteriori demonstration, posterior means later, behind. It argues the opposite direction. It looks at the effect and reasons out that there must be a cause. So if I go outside and the ground is wet, even though I did not hear rain in the night, I didn't hear the thunder and lightning, didn't know anything, I still reasonably assume that it rained last night. Now, it's not foolproof, because maybe somebody brought a hose, or they brought water guns or something and soaked my yard. Maybe an airplane came over and dumped water on me. I don't know. But in all probability, I can look at that effect, wet ground, and reason with a degree of certainty that it rained last night. Okay? So those were the 2 types of demonstration I asked you to describe. So why do we need to know those? Let's look on page 52. Since every effect depends upon its cause, If the effect exists, the cause must pre-exist. Hence, the existence of God, insofar as it is not self-evident to us, can be demonstrated from those of his effects which are known to us. What of his effects are known to us? Creation. All right, just like he said in the on the contrary, okay, through the things that have been made, we know there's a God. It can be demonstrated. Things don't make themselves, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So he's saying that his demonstration of God is an a posteriori argument. I look at the effects and I reason back that they were caused by God. All right, now let's take a look at some of his objections. In this case, we had 3 again. Objection 1. It seems that the existence of God cannot be demonstrated, for it is an article of faith that God exists. But what is of faith cannot be demonstrated. All right? If it's something you just believe by faith, it can't be proven. It can't be reasoned out. And he quotes Hebrews 11. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see, is the NIV version. Remember, this is what St. Peter, this is what Dante answered St. Peter in Paradise when he was quizzed on his faith. He said it's the substance and argument of things not seen. So before I go on with that, let's take a look at Aquinas' answer. So remember, the objection is, but wait a minute, we believe on faith that God exists. And things you believe on faith, you don't reason out. They're just a faith thing. Here's his reply. The existence of God and other like truths about God, which can be known by natural reason, are not articles of faith, but are preambles to the articles. Faith in God is just what comes first. I have faith that Jesus is the Son of God. I have faith that he came to earth incarnate as man and died and rose again to save me from sin and rescue me from death and bring me to his glorious home someday. Okay, all of that are things, those are things I believe in faith. But they presuppose God's existence. He says God's existence is a preamble to those other things you have faith in. For faith presupposes natural knowledge, even as grace presupposes nature, okay? We don't necessarily believe certain things only by faith. Now, I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna do this now. Faith and reason. These are two ideas, two concepts that are painted as being in argument with each other in modern society. That if you have faith that something is true, it's opposite of reason. You have no proof. This is just not true, and it's not been true for the majority of the history of Christianity. There are very excellent reasons for believing in the truth of God's existence, in the truth of Christianity, and we still, there may be times of doubt in which one has to hold on to belief in God's love and faith in his love for you. But there are also reasonable proofs that it is true. And so to say if you ever have this said to you, well, you just blindly believe that, it's not based on your reason. Well, I didn't know it was an either or. I think it's a both and. I definitely believe it is true. And I also believe there are really good reasons for believing it's true. However, Aquinas does make one comment at the end of that reply to objection 1, and he says, there's nothing to prevent a man who cannot grasp a proof, accepting as a matter of faith something which in itself is capable of being scientifically known and demonstrated. Not everyone is St. Thomas. Not everyone has the brain power to be St. Thomas. Most people don't have the brain power to be St. Thomas. And so if you can't understand the reasoning and you just say, I don't know, I just choose to believe it's true, The church and scripture tell me it's true. This is fine. This is fine. It doesn't make you less. Don't let the world tell you it makes you less. Not, you know, I flip on the switch, the light switch, and a light comes on. I mean, I know something about electricity, but I don't know much. And frankly, I don't really care. I'm glad there is someone who cares. I just frankly believe that when I flip the switch, the light comes on. If it doesn't come on, the bulb is burnt out. And if it's not the bulb, I'm helpless. And I need to go find my husband and say, why doesn't the light work? I just believe. It's not something I need to know the reasons for. So that's okay. I have faith in light switches and faith in light bulbs, even though I know reasonably people can explain to me how they work. I just don't care. Not that you shouldn't care about your science lessons. All right. Objection 2. This one is a toughie. All right. This is the one where Peter Kreeft put the little diagram. I'm going to get my whiteboard in a minute and show you, add to the diagram a little bit. He says, the essence is the middle term of demonstration, but we cannot know in what God's essence exists. All right. Okay. So, hang on. Where's my marker? Really? This happens in class, doesn't it? And it's happened to me again. Okay. Hang on. I'm going to find my marker. I'm lifting the computer now. Seriously. All right. I did have it. Excuse me. I'm going to go get another marker out of the kitchen, and I'll be right back. I just found it on the floor. Unbelievable. Okay. So, he draws, Peter Kreeft draws this diagram. And he says, Socrates, oh, now I need to check it. Yes. Rational animals. Can you see this? Yes. Okay, mortals, which would include all animals. Let me make sure I did that right. Yeah, I did. All right. So this is an illustration of an argument that would go something like this. All rational animals are mortal. Socrates is a rational animal, therefore Socrates is mortal. This is the middle term. And if you've studied logic, if you've studied syllogisms, you know what I'm doing here. This is the middle term. It's middle because it joins Socrates to being immortal. All right? If I say all rational animals are mortal, okay, Socrates is a rational animal, okay, since he's inside this circle, he's also inside the big circle. Okay? So, now, let's go back and look at that objection again. The essence is the middle term of demonstration. All right. So, what? Okay, I'm going to do another one over here. Okay, I'm going to lift this up and do another one underneath. What they're saying is God, the divine essence, and existing things. All right? We want to prove God exists. But the thing, the connection between God, who he is in his very self, and all things that exist is the divine essence. That's what that objection is saying. And he says, but we cannot know in what God's essence consists, but solely what it does not consist. That God is not evil. That God is not limited. Those sorts of things, okay? So we can't demonstrate, we can't do this, we can't use one of these syllogisms to prove that God exists. All right, now we have to look at Aquinas' reply. All right. When the existence of a cause is demonstrated from an effect. Oh, Hey, that's what we're doing. It's one of those a posteriori arguments where we look at the fact that things exist and we decide, oh, something must have made them exist. There must be a God. When we're doing it like that, this effect takes the place of the definition of the cause in proof of the cause existence. All right? So, what he's saying is, instead of divine essence, cause of existing things becomes our middle term. That because there are existing things, there must be a cause of existing things, and God is that cause. So we do not need to know the essence of God to argue in an a posteriori argument. We only need to know the effect, and that the effect must have been caused by something. That's a toughie. That one's a tough one. All right, let's look at objection number 3. If God could be, if the existence of God could be demonstrated, this could only be from his effects. All right, great, because that's what we just said we were going to do. But his effects are not proportionate to him. He is infinite and his effects are finite. We can't really know him through his effects because they're limited and he's unlimited, and they don't really tell us everything about God. What is Aquinas' reply? He says, from effects not proportionate to the cause, no perfect knowledge of that cause can be obtained. He agrees to some extent. Yet from every effect, the existence of the cause can be demonstrated. Not perfect knowledge. There are things about God I could not reason out from the fact that he created the world. But I could know he exists. And that was what this article was exploring. Not can we know everything there is to know about God, but whether it can be demonstrated that God exists. So Aquinas fully falls on the side of 1, God's existence is not self-evident. It's not so obvious that it doesn't need to be demonstrated. 2, it can be demonstrated using reason. All right, so our big number 3 article is whether God exists. Okay, let's look at his on the contrary. It's very short. It is said in the person of God, I am who I am. God is the authority we're appealing to for the existence of God. Seems a little unfair, but it really is okay. There are limits to our reason, right? God himself has revealed himself into his creation. Through his Son, through Scripture, through his actions. And so God himself is the authority who says, I exist. And Aquinas then gives 5 proofs for the existence of God. And I asked you to list these on your worksheet. Let's take a look at them. By the way, we're going to look on page 55 in a minute, and 56, I guess, starting in 56, is a summary of 24 arguments for God's existence. This is great stuff. Read through this, please. But let's go to page 58. His first argument is the argument from motion. Let's talk about this for a minute. Do you remember in the Divine Comedy, Dante went out to the outer sphere, and it was the primum mobile, the first mover. It is what moved all the other interior spheres, which in turn moves the earth, influences the earth, moves everything on the earth. It was all from that primum mobile. Who moves the primum mobile? God. The love that moves the sun and other stars is love for God in Dante's answer. So things move. Now, that doesn't have to be just move through space, all right? It means change. There's change, right? Things grow, things come into being, things die. And he says things that are in motion don't ever put themselves in motion. Things don't just naturally move. You can even just think of it as movement in space. Things don't just naturally move. You might say, well, things roll downhill, but it's gravity. If things are perfectly flat and there's no gravitational pull on it and there's no wind, there's no force acting on it, you guys know this from your science, you know this from physics, it's not going to move. And so we see a world in motion. What caused it? This goes back to Aristotle's idea. We talked about this. Those of you who were with me last year, we talked about his idea of a first mover, a prima mobile, all right? A force. He would not have understood this as the Christian God, but as a force that causes, in a chain reaction, everything else we see. And Aquinas ends each section here by saying, and this everyone understands to be God. All right? You can't go back forever and ever and have no first mover, according to Aristotle. Okay. Second, the second way is from the nature of an efficient cause. Now, let's stop. Some of you may have studied this before, but let's just stop a moment and talk about causes. This is also from Aristotle. I think we might have talked about it a little bit last year. In Aristotelian logic, I almost thought I lost my marker again. Things have four causes, okay? The first cause is the formal cause. The formal cause is what gives something its shape. What is it? All right. Let's do a house. Okay. The formal cause of a house is like four walls and a roof, the things that go together to make a house a house. Okay. The material cause is what something is made of. So wood and nails and shingles and, okay, all the other things you need to build a house. The efficient cause is who made the house. So carpenter or, the architect. And finally, the final cause. That's its purpose, all right, to live in. That's the purpose of a house, okay? So these are the four causes of a house. And everything can be broken down, just about everything can be broken down to those four causes. So, get my glasses. So in this second proof for the existence of God, he says the second way is from the nature of the efficient cause. Who makes things? This should start to sound familiar, okay? In the world of sense, we find there is an order of efficient causes. So, your parents made you, and you made a piece of art. There's a chain of causes, of causes of things to exist. Can't think of a good example offhand, okay? There is no case known in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. Things don't make themselves. Be lovely, if brownies made themselves. But brownies don't make themselves. I have to go in the kitchen and make the brownies. Nothing makes itself. For it would be prior to itself, which was impossible. To make yourself, you'd have to exist before yourself, which is complete nonsense. Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, right? Because you start with this item. This made this. This made this. This made this. That could go on and on and on. But you can't go the other way. This was made by this. This was made by this. This was made by this. This was made by the. Eventually, you need to get to the end. There can't be an infinite regression of causes, of makers. Eventually you have to get back to the first maker. Sounds like the first mover, doesn't it? And he says, eventually you get back to that first efficient cause, the first maker, to which everyone gives the name of God. Okay, third way. This one's kind of tough. There are things that could exist or could not exist. All right, a flower in your garden. You can conceive that, well, it does exist if it's there. You can conceive of a world where it doesn't exist. It is possible for it not to exist. It is possible for me not to have existed. If, in every parallel universe or something. It is possible for my house that I'm sitting in not to have ever been built and not to have existed, okay? So, I'll summarize this argument. If you were given infinite time, every possibility would eventually be realized. Everything that could possibly happen would happen. And so everything that could possibly not exist, this would include the universe, at some point wouldn't exist. And at some point, that all wouldn't exist all at the same time. But if it didn't exist all at the same time, how could it start existing? Because we just said nothing can be before itself. Nothing makes itself. So this goes back, imagine a world before, there is no before creation. We talked about that in the Divine Comedy, but in some existence in which the world does not exist. God has not created the world. The world could not have existed. There was a time when the world did not exist, roughly speaking. I like to use the word time. Then how did it get made? How did it begin? It couldn't. It couldn't. And Aquinas says, we can but postulate the existence of something, of some being having of itself its own necessity, something that it was necessary to have existed. There was no possible realm of any timeline, possibilities, anything that it could not exist. It is a necessary being. This all men speak of as God. Number 4. The fourth way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. All right? So, spectrum. We have bad and good and then everything in between. All right? And the bad would be the absolute worst. And the most good would be the perfect. And there's a realm of possibilities in between. We have cold and hot and all the realms in between. Okay? And he says, there is something at the top of the scale on each of these scales. Something which is truest, best, noblest, the uttermost being of that quality. All right? Now, the maximum in any genus, in any group like this, is the cause of all in that genus. In other words, if there is a perfectly beautiful, we compare all beautiful to that. If there's a perfectly good, we compare all goodness to that. There would be no good if there weren't an idea of the best. There would be no beautiful if there wasn't an idea of the most beautiful. And he says this thing, this cause of the spectrum, this we call God. He is the decider of the rest of the spectrum. And if you think about that, when we say something is good, in relation to what? God. If we're using good in the true sense of the word, not just like this pizza is good. There is a perfect righteousness, a perfect beauty, a perfect truth, and all the others are measured by that. If there's no scale, if there's no top of the scale, there is no scale. And if there's no scale, no value can be measured. All right, fifth way, he says, is taken from the governance of the world. We see that things which lack intelligence act for an end. Okay, this is the final cause. It doesn't mean an end like stopping. It means a goal. Things have a goal, right? They have a purpose. You know, not everybody agrees with this anymore. If you think about it, now, modern philosophers, like the universe has no purpose. But back in Aquinas's mind, and also in Aristotle's mind, it was foolishness to talk about the existence of anything with no purpose. Everything has a final cause, an end, a goal, a purpose. And he says, whatever lacks intelligence cannot move toward an end unless it be directed by some intelligent being. Things, inanimate, insensible things, don't naturally move towards their goals unless something helps them, something moves them, like an arrow shot by an archer. And he says that thing that directs all things towards their goal, that's God. All right, now you may not find all of his examples compelling. Maybe there's one that attracts you more than the others. Let's go back and look at his objections now. His objections to the existence of God. Back on page 53. It seems that God does not exist because if two contraries, if one of them is infinite, the other would be destroyed. But God is infinite goodness. If God is infinite goodness, he would necessarily destroy evil. But he does not destroy evil, so God doesn't exist. This is perhaps one of the most important arguments that we as Christians need to consider, because this is the viewpoint of a large number of people today. I mean, it was obviously back in Aquinas' day, but today, large numbers of people, you'll hear it phrased this way: how could a good God let children in, some third world country starve? How could he let that bank robber shoot all those people in the bank, or the sniper kill all these people? How can God possibly allow evil? It goes something like this: if God were all powerful, he could stop evil. If God were all loving, he would stop evil. God doesn't stop evil. Therefore, he is not all powerful, and he is not all loving. This is the problem of evil for the Christian faith. Now, it's certainly been explained. It's been refuted as a problem. And I believe, just a second, yes, on page 54 in the footnotes, he talks about St. Augustine, and C.S. Lewis also talks about this a lot. But he says there's one problem. Actually, he doesn't. He just tells you to go to C.S. Lewis's book. I'll tell you Augustine's answer. In a nutshell, does not plumb the depths of what he said. But the general idea is God, in some unfathomable way, is going to be using evil for good. So back that syllogism we had. If God were all powerful, he could stop evil. If God were all loving, he would stop evil. But he doesn't, so he's not loving and powerful. Now, I mean, that's a reasonable, logical argument. So there must be something amiss there. And Augustine would say the thing that's amiss is that if God were all loving, he would stop evil. Pharaoh did evil things to the Israelites, but God used the evil to bring about a very, very great good for the Israelites and demonstrate his power. One could argue that the most evil thing that ever happened in the history of the world was the crucifixion of Christ. It is also the greatest good that ever came to the world. So God is perfectly capable of using our evil choices and evil deeds for his good and his glory in a way that we are not going to be able to fully comprehend here. And this is indeed an article of faith, I suppose. It is difficult to convince someone with this argument that doesn't want to believe in God and believes that evil is the reason God doesn't exist, is the proof that God doesn't exist. It is difficult to convince them from this argument to basically wait patiently. We're not at the end of the story yet. It's not a very satisfying answer sometimes, but I think it's true. We are not at the end of the story, and at some point all the evils that God has allowed, because we do have free will, but he allows them nonetheless for a good that we're not sure how it all works together yet. You remember, I'm a beginner too. I'm beginning to be a beginner. So I don't completely understand. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I understand why God allows evil. But I believe that is the truth, that all the evil God does allow, he allows for a purpose, because I do believe he is all powerful and he is all loving. And he doesn't allow things for no reason at all. And all suffering touches him and moves him. And he will use it all. Nothing will be lost. I believe nothing will be lost. Okay. So, did we look at his reply? I don't think we did. I think I just replied without him. Oh, there's Augustine's answer. I knew it was in here somewhere. Since God is the highest good, he would not allow any evil to exist in his works unless his omnipotence and goodness were such as to bring good even out of evil. Okay, boom, there it is. All right, and objection 2. This is very modern objection 2. Basically, Aquinas' objection 2 is that, I think all this stuff we see, because remember we were doing an a posteriori argument from creation and from motion. I think all these things could be explained without God. I don't think we need God to explain creation. Maybe there's an easier way to explain it. This sounds very modern, right? Maybe it's just evolution. Like it just blindly acts by itself. Okay? So there's no need to suppose God's existence. That's what objection 2 says. Aquinas' reply. Since nature works for a determinate end under the direction of a higher agent, whatever is done by nature must needs be traced back to God as to its first cause. So also whatever is done voluntarily must be traced back to some higher cause than human reason, since these can change or fail. In other words, no, there is no other reason. In those 5 reasons for the existence of God, 5 proofs, he just knocked all of that out. Things don't make themselves. Things don't move themselves. Things don't move themselves towards a certain goal. Things don't just exist if they could possibly not exist. They don't just exist for no reason. So basically, the entire body of his article here was answering that objection. Okay, so in addition to all of those proofs, on page 56, Peter Kreeft summarizes 24 arguments for God's existence. These are great. Some of them we've just covered. Anselm's ontological argument. Imagine the greatest thing you can possibly imagine. It must exist because nothing's greater than existing. Okay? Motion, efficient causality, contingency, degrees of perfection, design. We covered those. Time. Time must have a beginning, so there must be a beginner. Those are all cosmological arguments, okay? Philosophical from space and the universe and its existence. Psychological arguments he gives us. Um, I'm not going to read through all of these. You can read them for yourself. I'm not going to take the time to do that. But I do want to add one in. It's not really a proof, but this is also from Peter Kreeft that I learned this idea. Um, well, let me start by saying it's very difficult to prove a negative. It's almost impossible to prove something didn't happen or to prove something doesn't exist. For instance, God. There's a real, I don't know if it's a real rise in atheism, but in the last 40, 50 years, there have been more professed atheists than in most of the centuries past. Certainly, since the Enlightenment time, there have been more people who profess to be atheists than thousands of years before. But it's a very, very hard position to defend. So let me ask you, if I told you right now that whatever room you're sitting in, there's a snake in that room, where would I have to have looked? Think about it. I don't have to search the whole room. There's only one place I have to have looked. It's the place where the snake is. If I open a cupboard door and I see a snake, I don't have to look anywhere else. I can turn around and say to you, there's a snake in this room. If I say to you, there is no snake in the room, where do I have to have looked? I have to have looked everywhere, don't I? I have to look every nook and cranny of that room before I can say with confidence there is no snake in this room. Okay, so if I say there is no God, where do I have to have looked? What do I have to have a knowledge of? I have to have a knowledge of everything that exists. I have to have looked, I have to have explored every single dimension of time, space, whatever that exists. If I know every single dimension of time and space and existence, who am I? I'm God. So when you say there is no God, you're claiming knowledge that only God can have. I don't think there are really atheists. I think there are people who recognize a God above themselves, and I think there are people who make themselves God. And I think atheists fall in that category. They're claiming God's knowledge because they're claiming complete knowledge of the universe. All right. Next week, and by the way, I know I haven't told you your writing yet. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But before I forget, next week, I have sent you out another worksheet, exactly like the one you just did for this one, for this week. The reading is a little longer, but I feel like it's the other really, really important area. I mean, it's all important, but we only have limited time together. So we're going to read pages 131 to 149. This is the section on ethics, okay? It's fun and enlightening and important to delve into questions like, does God exist and can we prove God exists? But the existence of God doesn't mean anything if he doesn't have anything to do with our lives. And not in a negative way like the pagan gods, the Greek and Roman gods, who were just sort of toying with people. We want to know what it means for us, for my daily life, that there is a God, that this can be demonstrated. How does that change my life? Does it? And if God created things for an end, if I have a final cause, if I have a purpose as a human being created by God, what is that purpose? Is there any way to know what is the highest good of life? What is the thing I should strive for above all other things? That's what Aquinas explores in this section. So there are, I don't know, quite a few articles this time. There are 8 articles, okay, in 131 through 149. So you're going to fill out one of these worksheet sections for each of the 8 articles, and we're going to examine things like wealth and fame and glory and honor. Are any of these things the things for which we are created? We're going to think about that and explore that. Now, here's your writing assignment. This is kind of tough, but not really. I thought about this and I thought, this is very much like what you've been doing in those essays, that we are going to get back and do at least a couple more of those essays from our Lost Tools of Writing, starting next week probably. But what I would like you to do is set up an article, a reasoning argument exactly like Aquinas' Summa. And I'm going to give you some options for topics. Okay, just a minute. I want more of this board to be there, so I'm going to scoot over. All right, that's much better. All right, let me get my notes. Okay, so I thought about making it something humorous, like whether chocolate is the best flavor of ice cream. But I didn't want that tone. I decided, we can do something fun like that. You can do that on your own if you want to. But really, Thomas Aquinas in this, he's exploring ideas, some of which seem very obscure if you read the whole Summa, but they're really important. Our knowledge of God is important, and our knowledge of our relationship to Him and what that means for our lives is important. So I didn't want us just to do something silly. But I came up with a few ideas. You can jot these down, or you can come back and watch the video again. And if you don't have paper, I guess you have your outline worksheet in front of you. Okay, one idea was whether it is wrong not to vote. Right? Many people feel like we've been given by God the right to vote. We live in a country where we can have a say in our government, and that it is morally wrong not to vote. So this is one choice. You're only going to choose one of these. Not all of them, one of them, okay? So that's one option. Another one is whether we should always tell the truth. No matter what. Whether we should always tell the truth no matter what. All right. A third idea I had is whether democracy is the best form of government. All right. Now, I do not limit your options to one of these three. All right. If you come up with another one, go for it. But I'd like it to have some sort of seriousness, some sort of weight to it. I'd like it to be an issue that actually matters and not, favorite candy bars or something like that. And not something completely silly. But if you think of another one that's just like a serious issue. Here, I just thought of another one. Whether it's wrong not to recycle, or whether we must recycle, something like that, okay? So you're going to choose one issue, one article. This is going to be your article, all right? And then after you choose it, I'm going to erase the rest of them so I have room, and I'm just going to keep the voting one, okay? So I want you to write it out just like Aquinas does. I would like you to have 2 objections. I would like you to have on the contrary. And remember, you should, if at all possible, you will quote an authority on this. All right, you have to look it up on the internet or Some topics will be more difficult than others. If you can't find an authority, and if you can find the answer in Scripture, it doesn't have to say exactly, you must vote. I mean, I realize that's not in the Bible, but you might find supporting evidence. All right. Then I answer that. Start the next section with that, and then you write what your answer is to it. And then I want you to reply to both of your objections. Now, if you have more than 2 objections, you go for it. I don't care how many objections you have. It's fine with me. But at least have 2. All right. So pick a article, an issue, 2 objections, on the contrary, in which you quote an authority, if at all possible. I answer that and give me your rationale, and then reply and knock down your 2 objections. Now, if you think about it, this is very similar to in the Lost Tools of Writing, when you're doing the refutations. I don't know that my first year Lost Tools of Writing kids got that far yet, but the second years, you remember that later on you've got your 3 proofs and your subproofs, and then you have a section where you're knocking out, you're giving objections, and then you're replying to the objections. This is a very similar idea. So, I mean, this technically could be, your issue would be, should you vote? And then it would be the same brainstorming process as when you do your A&I charts. So this is a good way, this is a good link in our school year to get us back into writing those essays, which we'll take a look at again next week. But, so I would like you to do that this week. I would like you to send it to me. Just email it to me next week. So you have that assignment. Look at the artwork that I sent you, the books of hours, just because they're pretty. And it's impressive that such work was done, such beautiful work. And the value that people put on books. Tina, you mentioned that in your research paper. The value of books that, because they are very common, and many books are inexpensive today, we don't value. They're not our treasures. Some books maybe are for you. So I want you to look at that artwork. Do an Aquinas-style article with objections. On the contrary, I answer that and you reply to the objections. And read pages 131 to 149 and fill out the worksheet. Just like I said last week, I am here nearly all the time. Please, if you have comments, questions, please call me. Also, some of the videos I posted last week, apparently if you post them as being made for children, they don't let you comment. Apparently children can't comment. So I'm going to try to post them all and make sure I don't post them that they're made for children, so that you guys can comment. And if I see that you commented on the lecture, if you've got a question or something, maybe everybody would like to hear your question. So let's get a discussion going under there. You can also discuss it with each other if there are just things you find particularly interesting, or just things you're wondering, or things you want to talk to somebody else about. Okay? So next Monday, I will have the next video posted here on the second half of the Summa, and then after that, we will be taking a look at the Reformation. Till then, you guys have a good week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.